Hey, morning, y'all. What's going on? Made my grocery store run early this morning, so I still got my little COVID mask on. Might just look like a bandana, but it actually has four dried up Clorox wipes in between it. Now, that sounds a little revolutionary, and I can get a little dizzy, but I got to get in and out quick. So it works. At least I think it works. Miss y'all. So today I'm going to chop it up on World War II. Continuing through that, we're going to hit up four terms. We're going to look at the Marianas Turkey Shoot, the Battle of the Philippine Sea. We're going to look at women in World War II. We'll look at Executive Order 9066, and we'll look at Pachucos culture. So again, always giving you that different angle, that different flavor on topics that you know a lot about, but I'm trying to teach you more about. So the Marianas Turkey Shoot took place June 19th and June 20th, 1944. At this point in the war, the U.S. is pushing through the Pacific. There'll be a joint invasion of Saipan at the same time. And you have a Japanese Navy that is still formidable. And you have a U.S. Navy that is definitely got that little that momentum at the time. So in charge for the Japanese was Ozawa Jishiboro. Ozawa Jishiboro. His nickname was the Gargoyle, which is dope. He was 6'7" and crazy height, right? He's up against Raymond Spruance, one of the top admirals in U.S. history, and the battle takes place in a place called the Philippine Sea. Now, both sides had intelligence on the movement of the other side, but it turns out U.S. intelligence was better. Jishiboro plans an attack on the U.S. Fifth Fleet, and Spruance knows it's coming. So he gets all his planes into the air. Meanwhile, the Japanese are sending 300 aircraft at our U.S. forces. So this is a 2-day battle. It's probably closer to 30 hours, but during the course of it, over 300 Japanese planes are destroyed as U.S. pilots absolutely decimate Japanese forces in the air. The Japanese are mainly flying Mitsubishi Zeros, what they call A6Ms, and the F6 Hellcats were the U.S. Plane of choice at the time. I think there were some Chesters in the air that day too. So Jishiburo calculates wrong. He attacks the American fleet, gets hammered, decimated, tries to retreat. Spruance chases after him, destroys about 100 more planes during that chase. Many historians think he should have kept chasing them and maybe wiped out the entire Japanese fleet. But we did take out, I think, 3 aircraft carriers. One was a converted luxury liner, which is another story for another crazy day. But the Taiho and the Shokaku, the Taiho and the Shikaku were taken out that day by U.S. forces. The Shokaku was at Pearl Harbor, so that was a little sweet piece of revenge for Spruance and the 5th that day. I'm going to transition to women in World War II. So Rosie the Riveter is the face of women in World War II. Women have to go to work in World War II. So if we look out west in places like California, 1/3 of aircraft builders are women during this time. If you jump forward to 1945, 37% of the workforce is women, right? So almost 4 out of 10 workers are women at this time. Women are going to perform every job imaginable in the United States, and employers are going to have to accommodate that. So you'll see daycares pop up for the first time in large numbers during World War II. They'll actually have like formal dances set up for women in these workplaces during World War II. And the image of the industrial woman that is Rosie the Riveter, created by Norman Rockwell, becomes synonymous with this war. Rosie usually has rosy cheeks. She got some guns, usually a kerchief, and it's sort of this marriage of American femininity with American female muscle. It's still a ubiquitous image to this day. Women will actually join the military at this point. So you have what's called the WAC, the Women's Auxiliary Army Corps, and you have what's called the Waves, which is the Navy's edition. Now, the WAC had a lot more membership, probably 150,000. And those women will do all kinds of things. They'll become, obviously, like clerks, but they'll also become map readers. They'll also become supply attendants and supply clerks. Generally speaking, they're not on the front lines. There are different reports about how close to the lines they got. And there's an age limit. It's usually about 20 to 45 years of age. In the Waves for the Navy, it's really tight. It's like 25 to 30. And, these women are given similar training to men, They're trying to free up men to go into combat roles as opposed to the roles that I spoke of earlier, and they become a significant symbol of that war. Now, having said that, there is some obvious racial issues in that context that I'll speak about in the next video with women in the WWII, black women in the WWII. But generally speaking, women contribute heavily to the war effort directly and then back home domestically. I can't speak enough about how much or how many women participated in the industrial sphere within America at that time. And like I said, out west in particular, but all over, certainly. Okay? Transitioning to Executive Order 9066. So the Japanese obviously attacked Pearl Harbor December 7th, 1941. And the Japanese American population was located exclusively on the West Coast, basically, right? So you have what we'll call the Issei. The Issei were first generation Japanese who had been born in Japan and moved to the United States. That was 1/3 of the population on the West Coast. And then you had the Nisei. Those were the children of those folks who were born here. Most had never been to Japan. Most, spoke as much English as Japanese. But the entire population was seen as a threat during that time. So you had authors like Dr. Seuss, who's going to lend his talents to, frankly, producing some really, really over-the-top racist cartoons against the Japanese. And it becomes the decision of the U.S. government and FDR through Executive Order 9066 to intern the Japanese American population. 110,000 Japanese will be locked up in all kinds of camps, like former horse stables, camps they're made to build, military bases. There's floodlights, there's barbed wire. These aren't hotels. These are really, really restricted, sort of open-air prison camps for the most part. In these camps, the Japanese will have, like, 4th of July parades, play baseball, yearbook clubs. They really try to show their Americanism through the course of this. There's a lawsuit called Korematsu versus the U.S. A guy named Fred Korematsu is going to sue the U.S. and say, "This ain't right. You can't do this." He'll lose that case, clearly. And it's not till, I think, Bill Clinton's administration that you see reparations in the form of $20,000 a family given to Japanese that were interned. Now, if you compare that to the tens of millions of dollars that they'd accrued in assets and holdings out west before this went down, it was a pittance, certainly. To this day, it remains a really controversial piece of the war. Thousands of Japanese will serve, many of them from Hawaii, during the course of the war. And you also have Korean Americans, some Chinese Americans, Filipino Americans served during this war. And this is when we actually end the ban on Chinese immigration, because of course Japan is at war with China, and China becomes our ally because of that. Okay. The last term I put up there was Pachucos. This deals with an incident called the Zoot Suit Riot. Now, Pachucos were Mexicans. They moved north of the border in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. They moved into El Paso, and this was mainly for labor concerns, labor reasons. During the war, you have what's called Operation Bracero, or the Bracero program, which is just arms, right? So we needed labor, and we brought a lot of Mexicans into the country at the time. Well, the youth amongst the Mexicans have this counterculture. It's called Pachuco culture. It starts in El Paso, and then it moves into L.A., and you have, tens of thousands of Mexicans moving into L.A. to work, to live, etc. What's really curious about Pachuco culture is it has its own language, literally. It's built of, like, Calo, which is kind of a nomadic Mexican, some people call it, I think inappropriately, a gypsy language mixed with traditional Spanish, mixed with English, and they come up with this whole vocabulary. So people are really conscious of, and a little bit scared of the fact that this large Mexican community in the Southwest is speaking a language that no one can even understand. And they're very counterculture. They wear zoot suits. Zoot suits are high-waisted, pleated, tapered pants with shoulders popped up on them, all wool, usually a fedora off that piece, and they're very identifiable that way. Pachucas, or women, wore short skirts, a lot of makeup, and were very, very flamboyant. So this culture is going to run head into sort of nationalistic American culture in the West during this time. the Zoot Suit riots take place, over that friction and over that tension, and for like a two week period, American military, law enforcement in the LA area are going to attack and go after the Pachucos, identifying them by their Zoot Suits. Another big part of this too is during the war, wool was rationed. Well, what do Pachucos make their Zoot Suits out of? Wool. And they keep making them after the ration call. So they have these underground tailors that are smuggling wool and still making their suits, and the animosity just builds. Having said that, 4.5 million Mexicans will come to the United States between 1944 and 1964 through that Bracero program. So when you look at the Latino community out west today, some people go on to say eventually this culture evolves into Chicano culture. It's really born of that diaspora that I speak of right there. So there's like a little side story on World War II. A lot of those Mexicans are going to work in the military industry, and a number of those Mexican Americans, it's sort of that borderline, will also join the military during that time. So one of those side stories, complicated stories. On my next video, I'm going to chop up the rest of World War II. We're going to transition into the 1950s and keep it moving. I miss y'all, and I hope you have a good day. Happy hump day. Sun's out. Get out.